Welcome back, everybody. In today's video, we are going to debrief the Pajero Mini road trip. I'm here in my garage, in my shop, and the Pajero Mini is back here in Montana. What an epic adventure. I think I must have said that, I don't know, 100 times on this road trip. It was just the trip of a lifetime. I fell in love with the car. I got to see some amazing things, and now it's back here, and I could not be more stoked about it. So in this video, I want to give an overview of the whole entire trip, talk about what happened, what went down, what went well. I want to talk about what broke, how I fixed it, what's still in the process of being fixed. I want to talk about the body damage and the kind of wear and tear on the vehicle that I got from this trip. I want to talk about, now that it's back, the things that I've fixed, and I want to talk about what's to come with this car. So overall, I am so impressed with this K-Truck. I went into this relatively blind, and I did something that was pretty risky. I bought a car sight unseen from a guy who I met online who I didn't really know, but I didn't know almost anything about it. And I made a point to not ask the internet a lot of questions like, hey, can this happen? Can I road trip this car across the country? Do you think it'll make it? Because I just find that people have different opinions, and they don't know me, they don't know my skill level, they don't know my kind of technical prowess. And so I knew I was gonna get a lot of like, no way, you're an idiot, don't do it, or for sure you can do it, but bring X, Y, or Z. I just thought, okay, I'm gonna lean on what I know, I'm gonna do a little bit of research, and I'm gonna go for it. So overall, this was extremely risky. There's so many factors here. One, I've never even seen a K car. This is my first K car I've ever seen, first one I've ever driven, first one I've ever road tripped across the country. And so I had no idea how fast it would actually go. I was getting numbers somewhere between 45 miles an hour all the way up to people saying they can cruise at 75 miles an hour and anywhere in between. People saying if you cruise on the highway, it'll blow up, to people saying it'll be totally fine forever and ever. And so I decided I'm just gonna ignore all that and I'm just gonna go for it. And so that's what I did with this. So it's extremely risky because I didn't know the car, but the other thing is there are no parts available for this car readily, easily accessible in the United States. Sure, there is some ways that you can get them. You can ship them overseas, that's no problem, but you're waiting weeks. There are a few people in the United States who have access to parts and they can send them to you, but again, you're waiting for a while and who knows where I was going to be when I needed it. So I knew that as I was going, if something broke that I really needed, I was either gonna have to fabricate something or I was going to have to mix and match parts to make something work to get me home. And so that's obviously a huge risk, but it was one I was willing to take because I thought that's part of the adventure for me. And it paid off. I mean, the car ran great. It had a few things that broke, which we'll talk about in a second, but overall, it was completely fine. It ran like a top. Even when it had all of its issues, it was still running reliably enough that it didn't leave me stranded. Not once did it not turn on me or do something weird that caused me to say, oh no, this car is done. It was reliable the entire time. So the other thing about this trip is I didn't have much of a plan. In fact, from day 2, my plan started to shift around. Basically, when I met up with Rum's Adventures, who I didn't know I was gonna be meeting up with, all my plans started to shift around. I ended up staying a little later in Flagstaff, which means I was a little later getting up to Vegas, and I was gonna do a few things in between, but I'm so glad that I had a flexible schedule because it allowed me to do things like hang out with those guys, Marcel and Rebecca, and to meet up with my friends in Sand Hollow, who again, I had no idea I was gonna meet up with them. I'm just so glad I had the flexibility to make stuff like that happen. It also meant that I could kind of cater the trip as I got more comfortable in the car. So when I first started off, I was legit thinking, I'm just gonna have to bomb straight back, or I'm gonna have to stick to main roads because this thing's not gonna make it. You guys saw me on that first day, the look on my face. My first 30 minutes driving this car at highway speeds was heartbreaking. I mean, my chest, I could just feel my heart sinking in my chest thinking, I can't do this. The car's not gonna make it. It was sputtering, it wasn't loving going uphill, and I knew I was gonna be slow. I knew I was gonna have to fight against the elements like elevation and grades, but it was worse than I thought. And I was trying to keep it together because I thought I just can't let this dream die the first hour into this trip. And sure enough, by the end of that night, by the end of that 4-hour drive, I was feeling way better, way more excited about it. I got kind of on this curvy road, and then bombing around in the lava pits day 2, my confidence started to go way up. And that just kept happening. My confidence kept going up and up and up. And that's why at the end of the trip, I started doing some pretty risky things, like multiple days of 100 miles off-road in super remote places, taking it off of crazy obstacles in Moab. My confidence in the car was building because I had spent more time time in it. And I say this at some point in the videos, but I think there's no better way to get to know a car than to go on a road trip in it. It just forces you to rely on the car, especially when you're doing overlanding stuff, like you're out camping it. You've got to rely on it, you've got to trust it, and as you learn to trust it, you have more fun with it, you have more confidence, you go more places with it. So I think that was really helpful that I didn't really have a plan, because it allowed me to flex with my personal comfort level with the vehicle, and it ended up making for a great adventure. So like I said, that first day was rough. I think that was my worst day of the trip. Now, it was great hanging out with my friends in Phoenix, but that sinking feeling that I had heading up to Flagstaff, I was thinking about, do I need to just head back to Phoenix? Do I need to catch a plane home and try again later? Like, what do I need to do? This is not going to work. And so that was the most emotional roller coaster of a day. And that night, I was so exhausted mentally and emotionally, I just passed out. And pretty much every day from there on out started getting better and better. But if that's my worst day, I think my top 3 favorite days are going to be the 2 days I spent in Moab. I love Moab, and I grew so much as a driver, and I bonded so much with the car, just learning, going up and down those hills, and then fixing it before Hell's Revenge was awesome. Like, that whole entire segment of the trip was just amazing. But I think the other day that really stands out to me is day 9. That's where I went from Zion National Park. I ditched the crowds, I ditched the mainstream, and I just hit dirt roads and explored. I had no idea that I was going to hit that road prior to that day. I had no idea where I was going. I just had an Onyx map, and I found slot canyons, and I found these giant gorges, and I found some amazing camp spots. It was everything I hoped for in the trip. It was an adventure that I didn't plan, that I was forced to take because I wanted to do something the Pajero Mini could do, and it was just perfect. Got to spend the whole night looking at the stars by a warm fire. That day on the trip really made me grateful that I was doing what I was doing, that I was out there, and it just made me so excited that the Pajero Mini can do all that stuff, that I wasn't limited. In fact, it actually made it possible for me to do stuff like that. So I think those are some of my favorite days, and I'm so glad that the worst day was in the beginning and it was all up from there. So let's talk about what broke on the trip. I wasn't easy on this vehicle. Like you guys saw if you've watched all the videos, there were several things that were broken kind of before I started, and then there were several things that I kind of made worse. So I want to talk about a few of them, and none of them were that big of a deal. The ignition coil would have been really nice to know 13 days before I figured it out. But for the most part, it was things that I could really easily fix. And one of the things about being on a road trip where I know I can't get parts for this car is you have to figure stuff out on the road. And so like when my CV axle boot was torn, it's not an option to go get a CV boot or a CV. And so you have to think, how can I creatively fix this problem without getting a part? And to me, that's really fun. As a mechanic, those are things I like to think about because it's just problem solving in a different way. Sure, you could have parked the car, waited, swapped a part in, but you didn't have to. I was still able to make it home, no problem. So let's go through the things that broke. The first thing that I talked about just a second ago is the CV axle, and with that I'll say the transmission boot. I discovered the CV axle early on but didn't fix it until I got to Sand Hollow. And then the transmission shift boot, that one I fixed in Moab. Those are just plastic bags and zip ties. And all that's doing is keeping dust out and grease in, and they work just fine. Now that I'm back, I'll probably look into getting those actual parts, swapping them in, and fixing them. Another one that people had a lot of questions about, myself included, as you're watching the videos, is the oil catch can issue, or specifically like the blow-by that was getting into the intake. Now there's a lot of ideas here. Is it a bad turbo? Is it a lot of blow-by in the motor? Like, am I pressurizing the cylinder too much because of bad rings? And all of these things are options. However, one of the things that happened halfway through the trip is right after I put on that oil catch can, it puked up a bunch of oil, and then I haven't seen a drop since. I'm not 100% sure what to make of that. There's a few ideas. One, the extra volume of having a catch can actually relieved the pressure that was coming from the crankcase, and therefore it solved the problem. The other idea is one that is hard to prove, but it seems to be a popular one, is just running the motor more, giving it some heat, cycling it, making it work on the highway, actually sealed up the rings, and therefore stopped that blow-by. I did flip the oil cap over and put it on top of the valve cover to see if I was getting any kind of pressure in the head, and I wasn't getting any after I did that little modification with the oil catch can. So I'm not 100% sure what to make of that. I have a catch can here at home that I could throw on it if I want, but I actually removed the catch can, and I've just been running it like it was wired or plumbed beforehand, and I'm not getting any oil in the filter anymore. So it's one of those things where either way, it's kind of fixed itself. I tend to be more of the idea of cars really like to be run, and they like to be run hard most of the time. An engine and transmission and everything is way happier if you use it, and if you use it to its full potential on a fairly regular basis. Everything inside of a car gets cranky when you let them sit for a long time. And so this kind of a road trip might be exactly what the Pajero Mini needed. Either way, that's the result of that. I don't think it's a blown turbo. I don't think it's that yet, but I'll look into it if it comes back. And I don't think I have excessive blow-by. I'm not sure what it is, but for now, it's fixed. The other one I want to talk about is that glue tread patch that I put on. And Again, I didn't blow out the sidewall yet, but oh my gosh, am I thankful that I had it. Looking back and thinking about how far out I was, how remote I was, and how bad it would have been for me to blow a tire, that I was probably in over my head there. That was riskier than I had intended. And the rest of the tires seemed fine, so it was just a freak thing. I must have caught a rock in some way. But later on during that day, after I had put that patch on, I looked down outside of my window and I was looking at that rear tire, and I had it wedged up against a rock trying to get up this obstacle, and I was grinding the tire into the side of a rock, and it was right on that glue tread patch. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so thankful that I have that extra layer of protection, because if I had blown that sidewall out, now I'm swapping on a spare that's as old as the car. It's almost 30 years old. It's not the right size. And am I going to trust that off-road when I have 50, 60 more miles of dirt to go? I mean, it really, really could have changed the trip. So I'm super thankful I had it. I did have to reapply the glue tread adhesive one more time on the trip, but it stayed the rest of the time. And you guys saw I was not easy on it. I took it on Behind the Rocks. I took it on Hell's Revenge. I took it on tons of dirt. I basically treated it like it was a perfectly good tire, and it acted like a perfectly good tire. So now that I'm back, I might just leave it. I'm thinking about swapping the tires anyways and putting the black in. The white just doesn't look that good now that it's been off-road. It's pretty rashed up. And so I might end up flipping that, but I'm not 100% sure either way. But right now, huge fan of glue tread. That patch might have saved my whole trip. Super thankful that I put it on. Last but not least, let's talk about the ignition coil. I cannot believe that it took me this long to figure out the ignition coil. Looking back, I would have expected a check engine light. It's very possible that the threshold was just not high enough for it to trigger a check engine light code, but I thought if I'm getting a miss, it's gonna show up, right? And so I was convinced that it was an ECU issue because every time I got on the gas, it would stumble. Well, what was happening is when I got on the gas, it was under load, and so it was arcing. But then as soon as it came into the boost, the load was significantly lightened because the turbocharger is doing so much more work that it would get out of that and smooth out. But I was thinking it's either got to be an ignition timing issue, so the ECU isn't communicating with the coils correctly, or it's a throttle position sensor issue where the throttle position does not know, it doesn't fully understand where I'm at, and it takes a while for it to catch up. So that's why I thought, hey, if it's one of those two things, I'm just gonna leave it alone. There's nothing I can do. If I had known that it was arcing to the block, I would have got on that way sooner. And now that it's running correctly, now that I'm consistently getting spark on all 4 cylinders, this thing's amazing. I take it all back about it being slow, sluggish, gutless. It is fun, it is zippy, it actually has some low-end torque, and it is happy cruising on the highway, going up hills. It's amazing. Now, I'm still keeping it below 65 miles an hour just because I don't want to cruise up in like 7,000 RPM range. It's just, I'm not comfortable with it. I don't need to go that fast. It's fine. But man, I can't believe it. So early, I mean, all that stuff in the beginning about me being concerned, all of those fears could have been alleviated if I just had consistent spark. Now, it's not the previous owner's fault. It's not really my fault that we couldn't find it. It was one of those freak things where unless you had it under load, you couldn't tell. So super thankful I found it. Also super thankful I found it before Hell's Revenge because I don't think I could have done that trail without having consistent spark on all 4 cylinders. The last thing I want to address is wheel balance and alignment. So I did take all of these wheels and tires off and I ran them on my balancer, and the long story short is these wheels are just really crappy. They're not straight, none of them are. I didn't bend them up. They're just not true. I tried a couple different ways of figuring it out, and what I ended up doing is taking the rims that are the most bent and putting them on the back, the best ones in the front, and I rebalanced them, and now I get pretty consistently no shake all the way up to 65 miles an hour. There's still a little bit of it there, Can't blame the car. That's definitely a wheel issue. If it really bugs me in the future, maybe I'll consider swapping out the wheels. But as it sits right now, I already did 2,500 miles in them. I think it's fine. So that's the issue with the shaking. It's probably not the steering rack. It's probably just bad wheels. The other thing I want to address is after taking it behind the rocks, I said it was pulling a little bit to the right, and that is still an issue. I thought it was the wind, and now it turns out it's probably an alignment issue. I haven't got a tape measure out to actually check it to see if I'm off, but my guess is something's just a little bit bent, something's just a little bit tweaked, so I might need to bring it into an alignment shop and straighten that back out. So there's some of the stuff that broke. Let's talk about body damage for a second. There actually is surprisingly almost no body damage done to this thing. For all the stuff it went through, I'm extremely impressed. It doesn't seem like any of the suspension parts are broken. It doesn't seem like anything major has failed. There's just a few bumps and scrapes here and there. So you guys saw the skid plate has a couple fresh bumps in it. That rear slider on this side is a little bit crunched, and that's because I dropped it on the frame, on the pinch weld, and so that is significant. It's not gonna affect the way the car drives or anything like that. It's mostly cosmetic. It's annoying. It could be repaired, but at this point, it tells a pretty cool story of when I dropped it off a 4-foot cliff. And to me, that's almost worth it. This car is also not perfect, by the way. It's got some dents up here in the hood cowl from where the hood must have caught the wind and gone back. And then the driver's side door has all sorts of little dings in it. And so to me, it wasn't perfect to start. Could I do some work to make it better? Yeah. But it kind of gives me permission to have fun with it. If I'm gonna end up scratching it up against a tree, if I wanna try something fun in it, I feel okay risking it because I don't have any money in the body and repairing it, and it's already a little dented up, so no big deal. Other than that, there is a little bump on the bumper here actually. I'm not 100% sure what is tweaked, but something is just a little bit off so that this plastic piece isn't actually sitting in here flush. It's possible it just needs to be moved a hair one way or another. But yeah, it's sitting in there just a little bit crooked. I haven't lost the plastic piece, so that's good. But it is kind of bent. And then, of course, you guys heard in the videos, there's all sorts of little scrapes, just little tiny guys, like I must have drugged the diff over something just once or twice. That transmission or transfer case cross member got a few hits on it, but that's all typical wheeling stuff, nothing to be alarmed about. And like I said, nothing is really bent or broken or damaged beyond normal use. And so all of that is really good. I can't believe how little damage is done to this, considering it has almost really no armor, no lift. All it's got is a little wider tire and a little taller tire. That's it. Pretty impressive. So now that it's back, what am I going to do with the Pajero Mini? And honestly, I had not thought this far ahead. I thought go on an adventure and see if we can make it home. And now that it's home, I'm not 100% sure. But I'll tell you what, I've been daily driving this thing and it is an amazing commuter, which some of you already know. It's fun to zip around town. It's got enough cargo space that I can do most of my stuff. In fact, actually, here's a clip of me earlier this week. I had to do a Facebook Marketplace run and a Costco run, and it killed it. So here's a very typical thing that I would do in any daily driver that I would expect of any car that I'm gonna drive every day. I would expect to do some sort of Costco run, you know, pick up a bunch of groceries or supplies or stuff, and then some random Facebook Marketplace find. So right now, these are tires, wheels and tires. They're 31 by 10.5 on 15s for another Project Montero that I just picked up. And as you can see, I've got 3 wheels in the back. I've actually got a 4th wheel, and then I've got another one in this passenger seat. Then I've got 2 batteries because I had to go to the parts store as well. And the Pajero Mini totally handles it. Now, granted, I can't see anything out of the car, but I mean, here's the deal. It was able to pick up all the stuff. It's handling these snowy roads just great. This thing checks all the boxes for a Montana winter commuter. So as you can see there, like it does everything I need. It gets the best gas mileage by far out of all of my Monteros. It's great for parking. It does everything. It's a great daily driver. And I was really concerned about the snowstorm. Our early winter snowstorms, they tend to be pretty hairy. We get a lot of ice, bad conditions, roads get shut down, so I didn't want to get stuck on the other side of a closure. But driving this thing around in the snow is a blast. It does great. The 4-wheel drive system is great. It has ABS, which is better than most of my other Monteros. So it's actually an awesome option for commuting in the snow. So as far as I can tell, I'm going to keep using it as a daily driver as I do stuff here in town. I also have some plans of fun adventures to take it on. In fact, next week is going to be Thanksgiving, and I'm going to be taking this out to get my Christmas tree. Every year, my wife and her family, we go out and we harvest a Christmas tree from the woods, and so I think it'd be just so funny to take this out and put a giant tree on it. Will it make it? We'll see. It made it from Arizona to here, so what's a Christmas tree run, right? I've also done a few modifications now that I'm back. The first one is I removed those rain gutters from the windows. I hate those things. I'm just not about it. Some people love them. Some people are gonna say, oh no, you've ruined it. Like, I don't care. I think they look dumb. And when I looked out my window, all I could see is this faded plastic from the Arizona sun. So I took that off. I still need to take a caramel wheel and get the adhesive off of there. I did save them, although I broke one of them. But I wasn't a fan of those, and I didn't want to take them off during the trip because I didn't want to store them inside the vehicle. So I figured leave them on, whatever. I also removed the rear tint from the rear windows, and you can kind of see it in some of the pictures, but there was like a mirror tint on the rear windows, and it just drove me nuts. It was weird to look through. I don't like the way it looks. I might go back and tint this whole car in the future, but in the meantime, I thought, I want to get rid of that. I do not like the way it looks. It was way easier to do here in my garage than it was to do out in the woods, and so I ended up taking that off as well. I'm thinking about doing a few other modifications to this, but very small. I'm not looking to lift it or to change it. I really like the way it is, and given what it's done in stock form, there's really no reason to change it. If I want to go and I want to bounce around on big rocks, I've got better cars for that. If I want to do something where it would require me to put a bunch of money into this, I might as well do that in one of my other Monteros. This right here being stock is so cool to me, and how capable it is, how much fun it is to drive around town, there's just no reason to mess with it. That being said, I am considering upgrading these fog lights. While they do provide some light, they are way dimmer than they could be. I really like the way they look. I don't want to be modifying this to look really, really different, but I might see about getting some aux beam lights to go in these spots, something that would actually produce a lot of light and something that's LED, because this alternator doesn't produce a ton of power, and so I can't be jacking up the halogen power in here. It's just going to draw too much. And so I might look into that, but it'll be something that's tasteful, something that kind of just retro mods this and looks pretty discreet. But I'm interested in that. If you guys have any ideas of what could go in here, let me know in the comments below, because I'm looking for some lights that would go there. The other thing I'm kind of curious about is I'd love a little more turbo noise. I'm not looking for race car power and stuff, but this is my first real turbocharged car that I'm planning on keeping, and it's fun to hear turbo noises. So whether that's an air intake or a blow-off valve, I'm not 100% sure, but I'd love to just let that thing sing. It's fun for me, it's fun to drive, and at the end of the day, this is just a fun car, and so why not make it as fun as possible? So that's the plan with the Pajero Mini for now, and I'm gonna keep making content with this car. I'm gonna go on silly adventures with it. I love the idea of taking this out and doing a camping trip like with my wife and doing something ridiculous. Like I said, getting a Christmas tree with it seems really silly, and I've got a couple other ideas that are, if they work out, I won't mention them here because if they don't pan out, I don't want to tease something I can't actually do. But if these things work out, it'll be pretty amazing and an absolute blast. I plan on taking it back to the sand dunes. I might rig up something so that I can tow this behind my other Monteros so we can go on adventures and kind of split it up where I drag it out somewhere and go on a trip. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm excited to keep making content on it. I hope you guys have enjoyed this journey. I hope you've enjoyed this car. And the last thing I wanted to say is I'm going to be making one big video of the whole trip. I think it was really fun to do the daily vlogs, and it was fun for me to share the trip with you. It feels like I took a bunch of you guys on this road trip with me, and that's so fun for me. But I'd like to do one big video showcasing the entire trip, and so that'll be coming out here in the next month or so. Hopefully you guys will enjoy that, share it with your friends. But thanks for watching the videos, guys. Thanks for all your comments. Thanks for all your support. It's been so encouraging to hear from you guys in the comments, and I hope you guys will join me on the next one as we go on more adventures in this Pajero Mini.